Hey everybody, greetings. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Yesterday I had a buddy on a Zoom call. Uh, it was fun. We discussed a lot of things, um, but it was a lot like the Joe Rogan podcast. We ended up talking for just shy of 2.5 hours, and we didn't do a very good job of staying on point. So we're just going to kind of chalk that one up to a dry run. Um, We're getting ready to do another Zoom call here, and we're going to try and do our very best to keep it to less than an hour and try and stay on point. So, wish us luck, and I hope you enjoy it. So, greetings, everybody. This is technically our second Zoom call. The first one didn't go bad. Uh, it went in excess of 2 hours, just shy of 2.5 hours, and we're not quite at the level of Joe Rogan or Michael Rosenbaum yet, so we just chalked that one up to a dry run. Uh, I'm Dan. This is Hugh Evans from the Northern Columbus area, and believe it or not, I'm actually going to set a timer for 45 minutes.
Good idea.
So, to kind of give people an overview, yesterday we tried to talk about two topics. It didn't go over that well because we were kind of all over the place, like a couple of guys just, having a conversation, which was great, but we didn't really find much to disagree about, which didn't really prove any points. And the one thing that did happen is both in the moment and after the fact was when I had asked you to do an introduction, my goal was to provide context to how you see the world by introducing yourself. And then in the conversation we had after the Zoom meeting, you had brought up some interesting points that I think can provide us an opportunity to expand on. So I'm not afraid to talk about it. I see a therapist for some of the things I've been through in life, chiefly the loss of my son, and how to not necessarily cope with that, but it's kind of like having a very laissez-faire attitude where that can get me in trouble. So I'm trying to be more cognizant of my attitude. And she mentioned this thing of this compulsion of language. So in my introduction video, the very first one I did, you know, she had informed me that I should use heterosexual Caucasian male because those terms are not triggering for people who find other forms of words triggering. And then in the conversation we had, you had spoken about how you were kind of caught off guard with your introduction. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually am still kind of holding by my thoughts from after yesterday. That a really easy way to approach that is rather than framing everything about, hey, this is the political angle I'm coming from, because I don't have a pure political angle that I hit from. No one really does unless they are truly hardline true believers. So yeah, as far as like just a very simple explanation of where I'm coming from, you want just the pure basic version. I am a Caucasian, heterosexual, cisgender, um, he, him, his, like just in the most basic form right there. That's who I am, and I'm happy to talk from there. So that way, if someone agrees with me, if they disagree with me, it's not going to be based off of, oh, he's a Democrat, he's a libertarian, he's a Republican. Who knows? Yes, I've had people agree with me and disagree with me, and change that viewpoint based off of what they've then learned my voting patterns have been. That's crazy. That's not voting with your head. That's not thinking independently. And I want people to use their heads. I want them to vote. I want them to use their heads.
So admittedly, not to sound like a hypocrite or uh, any other form of anything else, I do tend to vote Republican when there's not a better alternative. Good, bad, or indifferent, I kind of sort of have a confirmation bias against the Democratic Party. Uh, and I think I've explained that in previous videos as far as my political journey, which,
You've gone into that, and I think a great exit. A great example of that, at least in my mind. One of the first things that I ever heard you say, this is after like right when we were meeting, you just happened, like we were taking one of those breaks, and you walked out and you said, I'd rather suck start M9 before I vote Democrat before. It's like, this guy has some interesting things to say, I bet. Like, I was like, all right, let's find out what's going on here. So that's kind of how some of that even started.
Well, so one of the things we picked up on yesterday in our 2.5 hour Zoom call is attempting to speak about areas that are somewhat sensitive but outside your purview. Um, one of which I find is to be religion. Politics, the old rule used to be at dinner you never talk religion and politics. Politics, I guess because of social media or whatever, has become so mainstream, in whatever shape or form. But religion, I still find to be one of those odd areas because I am not a church going person. I am not someone of any prescribed faith. I was baptized an Irish Catholic, never went to mass, still don't know the Our Father. Um, but I don't have any position with the church. Um, People who have religion and it's kind of like to themselves. I have several friends that are very, very deeply rooted in their faith, but they've never once tried to sell me. They kind of keep it to themselves. I have one friend, I'm using my fingers. I have one friend who can be rather preachy, but he accepts me and all of my idiosyncrasies, so therefore I accept him. And why do I say that? Um, Again, in previous videos, not to like toot my own horn or what do they call it? Self-promotion. I talk about how there's this appearance that the Republicans are either in bed with the 700 Club or they've been hijacked by the, extreme conservative religious people where because of their religious views, they have such a negative view of stuff like homosexuality or, just various topics that quite frankly, I just don't care enough about. So getting back to the whole pronoun thing, because it clearly seemed to kind of touch off something with you at least. Either it's not a subject of major concern and major popularity in the area where I live, or it's also not a major topic of concern in the job I may eventually get to perform again, where I have not had any training whatsoever on like the use of pronouns or anything of that nature, where the majority of us are still stuck in what people might consider the old school, or we're not woke, if I'm using that term correctly.
And you know what? I even think that approaching it as, being woke, I think that that actually even frames it in kind of not a very positive light. The whole thing of, and I totally get it. So, just to some background on this, I actually knew only a little bit about everything within, a pronoun, pronouns, um, you know, uh, how things would work with like, assigned genders at birth, expressed sexuality, all of those concepts. I knew almost nothing about. Then within the past year, especially, so it was something that I had at least some awareness of, but it was kind of, I don't know what is. Does it really matter or anything? And in some ways, I think that it gets more weight than it probably deserves. But anyways, within this past year, a little bit over a year, I have worked for two companies based in California that also happen to be upstarts, especially the most recent one. They're a very young company, but when you're based in California, when you've got it as our headquarters are in San Francisco, you end up having to learn everything, and the operations of the company all come from that area. So I have things that border on like full on sensitivity training, and that gave me a better idea of where all of that comes from. And even if it's something that you aren't currently seeing as much where you are or with the people who you interact with, it's something where I'm certain going to see more of in the coming years, because uh, these all fall into protected groups. Like it or not, I don't think that that's going to change. And I think that that's an okay thing too, because historically, when we look at even just gay rights, gay marriage, And this is expanded into, I think currently the full thing, and I'll actually be kind of surprised if this changes anytime soon, but it's up to LGBTQQA plus. And yeah, exactly. All right. And but it just encompasses everything. And as far as I'm willing to see it, it's just saying here is here are all the ways that someone could identify and express themselves. And that's what it is. At least we know that. So in email signatures, something that I have been starting to see more of is you will see people listing their pronouns at the bottom of their email. Yeah. And
Please forgive my
that's
facial expressions. It's just,
it's it's totally valid because this could be something that is mostly new to you.
well, forgive me. I'm going to respond,
Yeah.
uh, and some of my responses may be semi-sarcastic. You've actually met me in person, so you know that I can be tremendously sarcastic. Although the previous, I think, 8 videos I've done so far have not quite demonstrated that. Um, so I understand various different points there, and I can do the math and I can wrap my head around it, whether I agree with it or not. Um, So one of the books I was required to read was The Incidental Insurgent, The Incidental Terrorist, where essentially, like when we're in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's thousands upon thousands of people who could really just care less. They just want to go about their lives and do their thing. But when they're forced into having an opinion, like if you as the American infidel or whatever, cause some sort of disruption or some offense or violate a cultural norm, which is very easy to do, then it's like, all right, you know what, mother trucker, you know. So why do I say that? Because first and foremost, this is my personal view, whether it's myopic, narrow-minded, take it for what it's worth. Um, I feel as a society, we were just starting to really embrace and wrap our arms around homosexuality. Okay. Where, we were starting to see them as people versus less than human. And we were starting to make strides in some of the religious communities where they were like, okay, well, maybe our book wasn't translated correctly, and maybe these are still people, and we were starting to make strides in the marriage part, which is literally the funniest thing about it is many different people have talked about how, why do we need to get the government involved in declaring our love for one another, and why do we have to get the government involved in solidifying our commitment to one another? And apparently it's just for taxes. So at some political point, you got people who, either because their constituents are hyper conservative religious people, it's an abomination, it's whatever, or they're just trying to cheat their way out of taxes. And it's like, I've been married for almost 17 years. I don't know how great the taxes are since I've been married. I can't really, where I make the most benefit on taxes is being a homeowner, because I got to claim all those property taxes. But, when I go to claim my wife, it's not like, hey, buddy, we got you. Here's a truckload of money. That's never happened. And here's why I brought all that stuff up. It's like the moment there was the smallest amount of acceptance, because America is what it is. We never do anything in moderation. My favorite quote, and I'm going to take it somewhat out of context, but never go full retard. You went full retard. That thing has such a wide range of use, kind of like a well-placed F-bomb, because it makes so much sense. It's like, okay, we got ourselves an inch. Let's try and squeeze a mile out of it. And it's like, I think that's where you're going to start to meet resistance. And it's like, well, these same people that demand tolerance tend to be the least tolerant people, in my opinion. I don't necessarily understand the need for all the labels. You're either gay, man or woman, or you're bi, in which case, like, I just can't make up my mind. Everybody's gorgeous, and I want a piece of it all. Anything else for that matter, I think we're getting murky. And I think Jordan Peterson has done some very extensive discussions on whether or not transsexuality is actually some form of psychosis. Just because I don't understand it and I can't wrap my head around it, doesn't necessarily mean anything. It just is what it is. It's like, look, which one is it? Are you a dude who appreciates femininity so much that you want to dress like a woman, but you still like women? Or are you a dude who's gay and therefore wants to become the female in the relationship? At which point, to me, that's a matter of psychosis. And we don't have to agree on it. But I think it's going to be that much more difficult for me to accept, because when it becomes more of a demand, for some reason, I have a natural rebellious nature, which doesn't make sense for somebody who did 20 years in the Marine Corps.
Man, I don't even know if it's so much of a demand. I think the way that I would view it is that at the very least, as far as whether or not you understand it, whether or not you get it, any of those things, end of the day, it doesn't even matter. What does matter? I can get the whole thing of, if if everyone started addressing you as, Mrs. Blackwell all the time, and, if they were applying, uh, her, she, any of those things to you, I'm going to guess that it might piss you off a little bit, or you'd at least be very annoyed. You'd be like, what's wrong with this? Why they're calling me that? But at the same time, if you actually identify as being a woman, or for a woman identifying as a man, or, and I'm not touching on all the nuances there, but if you're not being recognized for just who you see yourself as, that's gonna piss most people off. And so I can understand that if nothing else, if I know what pronouns they prefer, I'm cool with that. As far as my views of marriage, like when everything was really blowing up, and I'm going to say this was mostly like 15, 20 years ago, when ballot issues were coming up and there were constitutional amendments happening in states saying that, marriage is only between a man and a woman, all of that. And it's a purely religious basis for it. That didn't come from anywhere else. That came from religion. We've got separation of church and state. I don't care. You want
And
to
that's
marry
where you
someone?
lose me.
Like, yeah,
The religious pieces were like, okay, the moment you start throwing God in this, I no longer care to pay attention.
And that's where it all came from. That's where it all came from. You can't tell me that there was some other point where someone decided that this is the definition of marriage. If we really want to get down to the definition of it, legally speaking, you're absolutely correct. It's about taxes. It's about being able to share benefits. So as far as I'm concerned, the only place the government has in it, as far as, stating that two people are married, is in their record keeping. So I would be fine with it, even if we just said, marriage it's a contract. This is like forming some type of business entity where it combines these two people, because those are really the benefits that you ultimately gain from it. It's not so much that it's a big tax benefit. It's the fact that being a single entity, that if one of you is sick, you have actual rights to be involved with that person. Especially pre-COVID, that was a little bit more so. Right now, it's a little bit murky, but that generally speaking, it's someone who you can be involved in the decisions for their health. You're able to have more access to knowledge of their specific health. There are plenty of advantages that pop up through there that would be weird if you didn't have them being married.
And again, some of that, the majority of what you were saying, I don't have any disagreements with. My wife and I, when we were just engaged and we were in the process of, planning a wedding and deciding on how we were going to do it, I was selected to be a part of an advisor team to go to Afghanistan. And this is when I was stationed at the Mountain Warfare Training Center. And I had to inform her. I was like, look, as far as next of kin, notifications and all that go, girlfriend, fiance, none of that is recognized by the Department of Defense. So what'll end up happening is my mom my legitimate next of kin, mom, grandmother, whatever, they'll get notified if something should happen to me, and then you'll get notified. And I was like, the only way to bypass this is if we get married. Like if we forego all the planning and all the excess or whatever the case may be, and we just literally like, do you? Sure. Do you? Sure. Have any witnesses? Cool. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing and making light of it, but that's about what happened. Is April 24th, 2004, we scheduled our wedding, and like first week of April or something, they called off the mission. And I remember looking at my wife going, hey, still want to do this? And she looked at me like I was trying to back out of it. And I was like, all I was referring to was like, so we could do something bigger and better. And she's like, no, let's just knock it out. And I was like, oh, okay. So for those reasons you stated, I completely get it. Um, I've always had such issues with the church and whatnot, but they're my issues. So for anybody with faith, I'm not trying to condemn you or compete with you in any way, shape, or form. Otherwise, we can, and that can be a totally different conversation. Uh, there's certain areas where we were supposed to have separation of church and state, like you said, and it's like, you know I agree with those grounds, which is why I'm defending what I said, which is if we're just starting to become so much more accepting. I mean, for crying out loud, former President Obama repealed the don't ask, don't tell. So now you can be belligerently open and proud. And trust me, I was in Camp Lejeune, where it's one of the largest bases, where some people like gave themselves a parade coming out of the closet. In which case, you joke about conservative, liberal, etc. I'm probably like anybody else. Straight, gay, doesn't matter. If I'm in a public place, I don't necessarily need to see like pornographic PDA, like tongues down the throats and whatnot. So I'm probably like a lot of people where, I kind of want to be in my own bubble and go about my own business without being inundated with somebody else's. That
You know what?
being
That's
said,
actually, you know what?
go ahead.
That's kind of a fun little point that you bring up, because I hear that. Uh, Really, I hear that from a variety of generations right now. And the question I always have to ask about it is, does it bother you that you're seeing a PDA just, and we're talking just like garden variety PDA? Does it bother you the same way if you're seeing that from a straight couple as opposed to a gay couple? Do you have a different feeling from that?
Um, yes. Uh, depending on the nature of the PDA, I mean, there's like the kiss on the cheek, the smooch or whatever. Hey, goodbye. I was at the barber shop, and my barber, it's a female, her boyfriend was saying goodbye. I just happen to know them both. And, he just gives her a kiss, just no big deal. It's not like, it's none of that. I think the opposite, the latter of the two would be kind of like, oh, okay, guys, getting a little weird here. And we probably all remember back in high school, we're all a bunch of friends hanging out, and like, the one couple all of a sudden decides we're just going to start making out. And it's like,
And if it's just rooted in that part, if it's not so much that that it's bothering you that two people who decide that they want to express themselves as their affection, there's just like kind of a general level of decency within society of, hey, maybe you should get a room, but that it doesn't matter who's doing it or anything else, then I think that makes sense. What I think gets weird generally for me is when people start saying, hey, it's fine. They can get married. They can do whatever they want to do behind closed doors. I don't care, but I don't want it rubbed in my face, when their reaction towards a heterosexual versus homosexual couple is like wildly different. Then it's like, okay, if we go back, a few decades, and someone sees an interracial couple engaging in a PDA and loses their shit, it's these are effectively on par. That you're looking at something that is making you feel a certain way, and there's not really any there aren't any real grounds for it. Like,
yeah.
it doesn't really matter. Shouldn't bother you. And I get that it's something that, is there something to adjust to for a lot of people? Yeah.
If we're being fair and equal, I would probably say two guys engaging in a PDA. And I mean like excessive PDA, not like the, hey, goodbye, see you later, but like the, hey, goodbye, this is what you're going to miss. I would find it just as uncomfortable as any other PDA, but probably two guys would make me just a little bit more uncomfortable. Again, I don't personally have anything against it anymore. I'm pretty sure I did when I was younger, but at the end of the day, and here's a great analogy I'll give you, if it serves the purpose of this conversation. as I got towards the end of my career, like I could literally see the light at the end of the tunnel. I could smell the barn, so to speak. I was assigned one of the collateral billets of being the uniform victim advocate, which means anybody who had been the subject of some sort of sexual assault in the service, it was my job to be their advocate and deal with them. And I was getting ready to give a brief, and I had a small classroom because I had to give like multiple briefs to small classes because I had to let these guys get back to work. And one of them had asked about the whole homosexuality thing because there was this thing making the news where the one guy came back from deployment and he leapt into his lover's arms, and he was in uniform, but he was being the more effeminate one and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, that was kind of weird. Maybe it would have been better if he was in uniform and his lover jumped into his arms. I mean, I see the optics there. But then we started talking about it, and I was like, well, look, I work in the operations office, all right? So you guys know what I'm exposed to. I know who has passed and who's failed height and weight. I know who has passed and who has failed the physical fitness test, the combat fitness test, who's qualified with the rifle. I also stand duty from time to time, so I know who's on restriction. I was like, let's break that down for a minute. I'll let you in on some secrets in the military. At the very basic level, what are some things you're supposed to do to earn your paycheck? Well, in the morning, you're supposed to get up on time, make sure that you have a clean shave on your face and that your uniform is clean, neat, and presentable. And if you live in the barracks, your barracks room is clean, neat, and presentable. And then as the barracks goes as a whole, an entire building, the overall barracks is clean, neat, and presentable. It's part of being in the military. Then you also have to get to work on time. Once again, fresh haircut Monday morning, clean shave every day, clean, appropriate uniform, show up on time, etc. Some of you in this room can't even do that. And yet, unless we physically charge you with a violation and you go to non-judicial punishment and you're found guilty, I can't take away your pay. Then we just talk about your overall job performance. Okay. If you suck at your job, I can't do anything to take away your pay other than recommend you for not getting promoted. Then we go into the physical fitness test and the combat fitness test. Once again, at what point in time have we discussed anything remotely close to sexuality? There's no gay rifle qual. There's no gay PFT. There's no gay CFT. All right. When I demonstrate a pull-up, I'm not demonstrating a straight or a gay pull-up. There's no such thing. There's no gay ammo can lift. There's no gay run. I mean, I'm sure in a more comedic, sarcastic value, we could probably do something.
I can see the potential there, but yes. I appreciate where you're going.
Right. So I was like, at the end of the day, none of these things that you're judged by have anything to do with sexuality. Sexuality is more of a personal thing on your own time. So at this point, if I had an entire platoon full of flaming homosexuals, my God, if they could just show up on time, fresh haircut every Monday morning, clean shave every day, the uniforms were clean, neat, ready to go. Their barracks rooms were clean, neat, presentable, the overall barracks, and they also did their job and did it well, pass a PFT, pass a CFT. I can give them time off and they won't go out in town and do something completely stupid to where now I have to waste so much time of mine dealing with their stupidity. If the gays want to get married, because I dealt primarily with males, the infantry hadn't begun integrating females yet. So if the gays want to get married and they can have stable relationships, again, I don't care, because part of what I also did was I dealt with train wrecks for marriages. These poor schmucks that get married between 18 and 24. And, ladies, forgive me, but in the military, we can demand fidelity. We cannot demand fidelity of the civilian spouse. You've got some 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old little hottie, all right? And she's at that phase in her life where everything is just working top to bottom. And we got to go to the field or we got to go on deployment, and now she's lonely, all right? And let's say you came from, I don't know, Mansfield, Ohio, where you're a big fish in a little pond and you can marry the prom queen. Well, on your best day, you're a quarter pounder with cheese. And on her worst day, she's a 7 without makeup. And you bring her to Camp Lejeune. And all of a sudden, you're like, hey, babe, I got to go. You stay loyal, okay? Sure thing, not a problem. By the way, there's steak on the menu. Don't eat it. Be loyal to this quarter pounder with cheese. You know, I dealt with that to no end. So again, if the gays could have faithful, committed relationships and they're not bouncing checks or doing stupid stuff, I don't care.
And you know what? This actually sounds a lot. This was something I really enjoyed when Jim Mattis was going through his confirmation hearings with the Senate, and they were really looking for anything they could push him on. Of, well, what about transgender service? How do you feel about people serving who are openly gay? And he fell back on the same line every time, that all he cared about was combat effectiveness and lethality and having the greatest fighting force on the planet. End of the day, what matters from the fortunate chance to complete his study as far as the difference, like, it'd be kind of nice to know, because now, I mean, I'm sure it'll probably end up coming up
Yeah.
under Biden, but still, it was one of those responses of, how is anyone going to disagree with that? I mean,
The
I'm sure people could
challenge
find a way.
the challenge here though is from those outside the military, I don't think you should be placing any judgments upon us. Case in point, the military is not the place to go if you're confused about your gender and you demand that the DoD pays for gender reassignment surgery, and then also should fund and pay for your capacity to somehow have children. Um,
That was honestly, and remains probably, my biggest concern about that whole side of it, is how much time and effort are we going to take out of, because I mean, they still come out of the same budgets, and the the money is going to come from somewhere. And if you're having to pay tens of thousands of dollars for someone to undergo reassignment surgery, you're going to be supplementing their hormones for life, you're going to be going through all of those steps, then it does get to be a little bit unavoidable of, this is going to have some negative impact. Even if, in a perfect world where if you could just have an operation and everything is going to be as you want it for the rest of your life, like, it would be a lot easier, I think, to accept.
See, and this is where maybe we will differ, and I fully intend on being civil. Um, Again, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in certain things that I would consider common sense. Um, hey, congratulations, it's a baby boy. How do you know? There are two physically viewable testicles and a penis. This child has been biologically born a male. He is the penetrator, not the penetratee. He will produce sperm, not eggs. He does not have ovaries. And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm not trying to go out of my way to be offensive. I'm just stating what I believe to be facts. Just like, if you are, I don't want to say confused, but I don't know another way to say it. If you're not satisfied with your assigned gender at birth, as in nobody gave it to you, okay? We were created in a certain way. If you, whether it's divine or evolution, we evolved to be a certain way where, okay, in order to, repopulate the species, I need a willing and fertile female, and then I must be equally as fertile myself. About as far as I think we should go with that, because I think we get the gist of this. I've had to explain this to my daughter because she was having an issue with a young girl who was apparently transitioning in her own way. I think mostly externally as far as her dress and everything. And she started calling herself by a different name. And apparently she was attracted to my daughter. And she was, I don't want to say assaulting my daughter, but she was bothering my daughter to the point where my daughter had to go and make a formal complaint. So then I had to then have a discussion with my daughter. And it was one of the most awkward things in the world because I was like, look, in spite of everything, you cannot physically give a female a penis. Reproductively speaking, you cannot do any kind of surgery to physically give a woman a penis and testicles, etc., to the point where she has now become a man. We are not like that special type of frog that can flip its sex if necessary, and vice versa. You cannot, you may be able to lob the penis off of a man in some form of a surgery, but you cannot give him ovaries, and you cannot give him the ability to carry a child to term, at least as far as I know. If
Not yet, not yet. But
right.
I mean, they're already. I'm trying to remember if there's actually been a. I feel like there may have been an actual like uh, penis transplant surgery done on a woman. Like I think that that has actually been done. I'm going to say that I know that it's been very successful in trials on men, but you know that's I'm not 100%, but it's something that like you will see. But yeah, I
Well,
yeah.
one of the things that Jordan Peterson has also talked about, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I don't have his exact quotes. So something that people don't necessarily realize unless you've done the actual studies, and I learned this when I was researching steroids. Um, I can't remember why I was researching it, but I was. And so we both produce estrogen and testosterone. Now, because you and I have the testicles, we have the ability to produce more testosterone than we do estrogen. And then vice versa, because of the ovaries and whatnot, women produce more estrogen than testosterone. And as a result, excess estrogen produces more feminine features, excess testosterone produces more masculine features, whether it's the body hair, the facial hair, etc., the voice, you name it. Which is also why some men who have abused steroids, they've they've suffered testicular shrinkage, and they've also suffered a condition known as gynomastia, where it's an enlargement of tissue around the nipple area, or what they would
You could
refer
just
to.
say that they got tits.
Well, it was called bitch tits. It was,
Exactly.
but some of
Exactly.
the other
Yeah.
consequences too, based on what sort of synthetics they're taking, is they get what's known as roid gut, because they're
Hmm.
taking combinations that also increase the size of the internal organs. But all things being fair and equal, you know, religious people are going to refer to divine intervention, that God made us as male and female in order to replicate the species. Um, Deep-rooted scientists would say we evolved that way to, because if you look at the animal kingdom, so on and so forth. What I would say is, from a biblical standpoint, humankind existed as a species before we had Bibles. The first secular religion was Judaism, and they were shunned horrifically by the pagans. Um, so if humans were around before the Bible, before Christianity in all of its various forms, and before Islam in all of its various forms, then I venture a guess that homosexuality has existed way beyond that, and quite possibly even, this is where I'm probably going to earn some hate, but even possibly the psychosis of transgenderism.
Yeah, if you want to look into, and this was something that I picked up in one of my classes on genetics, and this was like fascinating to me. So not only within populations can you, and this is within all animals, can you actually find what percentage of them will be homosexual, but we actually have found in cases, and I was able to do this with fruit flies. There are fruit flies, yeah, that the male fruit flies will do their like mating dance preferentially towards other males, and this is well documented. Fruit flies are one of the best understood animals on the planet, and so that's something that's been with us. And from any religious angle, people can say whatever they want, but there's homosexuality throughout the animal kingdom, and that's what it is. Now, if you're going to be really religious on it, and if you're going to be following everything within Leviticus, yes, you're going to find a way to be in full disagreement with me. But that's in that case, it's not my problem.
Yeah, the religious aspect is not a thing for me. Um, what I would probably argue, as far as if I was forced to pick a hill to die on, I can accept homosexuality, girl on girl, guy on guy, or even bisexuality. People who are like, I find everybody beautiful and I want to be intimate with all of them. Um, I do think anything beyond that starts to become a form of psychosis. where it is actually a choice. And this goes beyond the actual stuff where people have been misdiagnosed at birth for various reasons. An oversized clitoris being misdiagnosed as a penis, an undersized penis or micro penis being misdiagnosed as a clitoris. Therefore, the testicles are part of the labia of a vagina. These terms, while are technically anatomically correct, sound weird to say, but there have been actual cases of this where a young girl, it has been born and raised a girl, but only to find out that she was unfortunately misdiagnosed at birth because of micro penis, and started going through male puberty, and then vice versa. Same thing with boys. In which case, there have been, you know that is a subject where I think there's validity to question what to do next. Because if even at a deep rooted psychological level, this young boy feels like a girl, then I think, there seems to be some sort of moral responsibility to assist there. Um, and I
And
think that's the only reason when. Same thing
I
with women.
I think what you're ultimately coming down to on that is the whole question, and this is something that there's no scientific consensus on that I'm aware of, but whether or not if it is that you are transgender and that you are seeking reassignment surgery, if that actually is an issue of being a gender dysmorphia. Yes, it compared to, so generally speaking, like within the human population, you're looking at a rate, and I've seen this number shifting a little bit over time, but we can say it's a pretty safe number that approximately 10% of the population is going to have some form of sexuality that is non-heterosexual. We'll just go with just blanket term on that part. But that when you get down um, to things that may or may not be gender dysmorphia, then we're talking about like maybe a fraction of a tenth of a percent. So it's like a really low number,
Yeah.
to the point of, you know, not that, and again, I want to make it clear, this isn't something where I want to, that I have anything against people in that situation, or that I want them to have any less rights or be able to live their lives the way that they want. It's just a question of, hey, if the evidence ends up supporting that there's something else going on, and it's a way that, I like to think that whatever is going to enhance people's lives, let them live happier, healthier lives, and be active members of society. Then there's not much that I'm going to be against.
Yeah. I know we're getting close to our 45-minute mark, and it's not that I want to necessarily, take control here. What I would like to say is this, and a lot of this comes from other people's commentary that I watch, like Joe Rogan and others like that. Um, I personally don't think gender is fluid. Um, I am, in this moment, hesitant to play games with pronouns. If you're a gay female, to me, you're a female. You just like women. I otherwise don't care. If you're a gay guy, you're otherwise a male. I otherwise don't care. If if you come into my presence, and this has actually happened, and I'll get to that in a second. If you come into my presence and you have legitimately fooled me, and I address you based on what I assume to be your appropriate pronoun, and this has actually happened. I was at a Thanksgiving gathering at a friend's house. They had a lesbian couple over at their house. One of the lesbians had dressed very masculine, had a short masculine haircut, was wearing a ball cap, wearing a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and boots. Had a deeper voice, no sign of a bosom. And in the couple of hours or whatever, however long it was that we were going back and forth, because come to find out, she was a sheriff's deputy and whatnot. And, I was just getting out of the service. And I talked to her like she was a dude. And on several occasions, I was like, bro, brother, man. And so they had to get up and leave. And my buddy's brother-in-law, who was in the Navy, he was like, you do know Bailey's a woman, right? And I was like, Bailey's a chick? They were like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. They're like, yeah, Bailey and so and so are gay. They're a gay couple. And I was like, okay. And I was like, oh man, is Bailey upset that I was treating her like a dude? And then my buddy Rick was, no, you probably made her day. But again, I was fooled, and I didn't feel any sort of necessity to. Before we begin, I just want to make sure, are you actually a guy looking like a guy? See, I find that kind of social etiquette unnecessary, and I find the whole sense of putting pressure on pronouns unnecessary. And again, this might, as if that might not be unpopular already, this might be extremely unpopular. Um, the unfortunate truth is, in life there are winners and losers, okay? And sometimes that's when the term majority has to mean something. If the number of people that want to get wrapped up in pronouns and gender fluidity are in such a reduced minority, then I hate to say it, but the whole phrase "when in Rome." I think in order to maximize your quality of life, then you have to go along to get along. That may not be a very popular response, but I think it is what it is. And one last thing before I turn it over to you real quick. I do not think gender is fluid, and I think it's tremendously irresponsible for parents to take actions with their adolescent children who haven't even come close to puberty yet. I think that is tremendously irresponsible.
Yeah, I that's one of the things. I've actually had several conversations uh, on that topic, and it gets interesting very quickly because I have friends. I'll see them on Facebook, and they'll be dressing their children up in what are I think probably the politically correct way to frame this is they're putting them into what are technically the opposite gender's clothing or traditional clothing. Um, Whatever the case, you're dressing your kids up backwards. If we want to just make it simple, uh, and especially when you're doing this with young children, and you're saying, oh, I see you're playing with the truck. You should play with this Barbie instead, or vice versa. That it's really easy to cross into before someone happens to start having any idea of who they are or how they feel, to start putting that in. It's like planting those seeds in there of, hey, you might want to try this instead. I don't feel like it's doing them any great service. That's, hey, I see that you're right handed. Maybe you should try being left handed instead. It tracks in a very similar manner for me on that part. And I think that in terms of parenting, that gets irresponsible. If you get up to the age of, approximately puberty, and it turns out that your kids are saying, hey, this is who I feel like I actually am, and this is who I'm attracted to, and that's just part of my being, then it becomes irresponsible to not at least be supportive of your kids and to still love them the same way, and to
Yeah.
do everything right by them as you can. So yeah.
Yeah. And, there have been several studies done in which case they say women usually mature mentally. The female brain matures somewhere between 23 and 25, and the male brain somewhere between 24 and 26. And from my own personal observations, I'd say that science is pretty daggone accurate, in which case, even looking back on my own life, um, as smart as I thought I was still pretty much an idiot, possibly even up until I got married. And then even after I got married, my wife would probably argue I'm still a bit of an idiot. Um, in which case, I think I'm more apt to making better decisions now than I was at that age. So again, tragically, if the government says you're a legal adult and you feel like that's what you want to do, then I feel like it needs to be your decision and not the parents' decision. But I feel like this has been a good conversation. I feel like we haven't really disagreed on much, and I don't think neither one of us have been too combative. But I get the impression you are more, you are more agreeable with the pronoun thing than I am.
Basically, I don't have anything against it. I think so. Like the example that you cited at that Thanksgiving, that like you weren't really concerned with any of it, and I think it would be awkward to always have to introduce yourself doing nothing but pronouns. if someone gets mad at you because you're using the wrong pronoun and you didn't know any better, then that person is being a dick, plain and simple. It's just at least say, oh, hey, I prefer to be called him or her. Cool. You can work with that. Like, you only have to really be told something like that once usually, but
Yeah.
otherwise you're operating off of the information that's in front of you right at that moment, and you weren't trying to offend anyone. You weren't trying to belittle anyone. There's nothing that you're doing that should technically be offensive at that point. And I'm willing to play within those rules. I don't ask people to identify themselves by their pronouns. That's not something. I don't shake their hand, or
Yeah.
pre-COVID shake their hand when that was a thing.
See, and I will say this, and I'm not trying to extend this conversation to where it's unbearable to watch, but um, in that moment, she never made any corrections to me, and it was brought to my attention later that she does identify as a woman, and she feels like a woman. Just, she may feel more comfortable in different clothes than other, like masculine clothes. Just maybe she finds our clothing more comfortable than a dress. It is what it is. But I also extremely appreciate the way she conducted herself. The fact that, maybe she accepted the fact that I never asked her gender, and therefore, based on her appearance, I made an assumption. But regardless of my assumption, I was never impolite or offensive or rude to her, and therefore she responded in kind, where we were civil and we were polite to each other. And I think that's inherently a responsibility of being an adult, is not going out of your way to be offended, not going out of your way to victimize yourself. And I really appreciated her for that, because she could have totally, turned that around in a completely different direction. And on that note too, one of the most difficult things I have in my line of work, if I get to return to it, is when I'm standing on the podium for 6 hours, there are times when I have a class, and because of these things we've talked about, right, where people are becoming more fluid with their gender, there are times when I can't tell, where I'm sitting there and I'm like, is that a really soft dude, or is that a butch chick? Because if you hide the bosom, that's usually the first giveaway. The Adam's apple is not. And I find that difficult because I have no desire to go out of my way to piss people off. All right. I'm just trying to get through a brief in 6 hours. And I usually, my preferred method is sir and ma'am. And I find, or, if I get a little laxed, I might, dude or bro a guy, but I'm always, very ma'am-like with the ladies. And I'll admit there are a couple times in my classes where I'm kind of like, uh, I don't know. And I try to find the most neutral way, if I have to deal with them at all. That, all right, I don't necessarily deal one-on-one with everybody in my class, but you know, I, this has nothing to do with the pronouns, but it's like, if you're a female who's gone out of her way to look like a dude, and you do put precedence on your pronouns, is it going to become a thing when I misidentify you? Are you going to make a complaint that is detrimental to my career? I haven't had to deal with it yet, but I feel like it's coming, and I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really think that that's going to be, as long as you're conducting yourself, uh, and as genuine of a manner as possible, and you're trying to demonstrate decency. Someone may try, but then it's going to be closer to stuff like, if someone wants to prove allegations of, say, like sexual harassment, it's going to be a very
Yeah.
similar situation, I'm sure.
Well, the worst it ever got was, there was a woman in my class. Come to find out, she was all about being a woman, but for whatever reason, I guess when she just happened to come through my class, whether on a dare or whether she had just gotten fed up, she had gotten like a manly haircut. And in the military, that's like usually skin rather high on the side. But for her, she had what would have been classified as like a low regulation haircut for a Marine. And then I just happened to catch her out in the catwalk talking to some of her fellow Marines. I guess from the same unit. She was like, bantering. It's like, oh, my dumbass husband, I got to go pick him up after this. And then I guess they knew who her husband was. So they just sit there talking. And I was just kind of like, that's a chick. She's got a husband. And I was like, that is such a weird haircut. But she's okay, whatever. And I, you know, in those rare circumstances, I don't know. It's one of those where I feel like I'm stuttering and stammering here. I just go back to that Thanksgiving event where um, it was never brought up, so I made an assumption based on appearance. But everybody acted like nothing ever happened. So I think this social trend, the pronoun thing, I could probably get over a lot faster than this whole thing with gender fluidity, and parents are like, well, I think my son really wants to be a girl. Are you sure? Because he's 4.
I'm sure you would love the people who start off raising their children as theys. If you aren't familiar with that practice, yeah.
See, and I just don't know how much of that we're going to deal with out here, because the military community is still a bit of an isolated community. Less than 1% of the American populace is serving on active duty. So while we seem like the majority out here, everywhere in America we are the minority. Where you live in the greater Columbus area, so you're in a major metropolitan area where you probably get inundated with it a lot more than I ever will.
Actually, it's still minimal here. I mean, you have to remember that while Columbus is one of those blue pockets in Ohio, we're surrounded by a sea of red. So Ohio is, I would guess that this was kind of what you observed while you lived here, that it's pretty moderate. Like, yeah, you'll find stuff that gets more extreme in some ways, but that sort of thing, as far as, raising your child, I haven't encountered anyone in this area going that route yet. I'm sure someone is, I just don't know them.
Well, we should probably close this out so
Yeah.
the video itself isn't unbearable. What I
Yeah.
will say as an outsider, when I was stationed in Ohio, in Columbus directly, I don't know how many other states are like this with the exception of Texas. What I noticed was not so much the politics as much as I noticed pride in the overall state of Ohio. Like, we are Ohioans, hear us roar type of thing. And then you and I talked about this when we first met. The fanaticism that is Ohio State. I mean, politics and Jesus come second to Ohio State and the Buckeyes. So
I actually don't know. This is a fun question right here. That, in a lot of parts of Columbus, when you're driving around, you will see, I don't know of too many other states where you'll see people flying the state flag, but in some parts of it, of Columbus, you'll absolutely see it. I don't know the flag etiquette of, can you fly a Blocko over an Ohio flag?
well,
maybe someone knows. I haven't looked into it.
That's kind of like a fun fact that I'd like to close on, if you're okay with that.
I'm totally good with that.
So how I've been saying this whole time, I believe we as Americans are better than the two-party system. We're better than these tribal allegiances, these echo chambers, that we can have conversations and we can find common ground, or we can disagree without dehumanizing each other. Just like I may not be completely on board with certain things, but I don't want to necessarily take away somebody's humanity. Ohio can be a great example of this, because you can be totally deadlocked on social and political issues, but my God, it's football season, and you guys are retarded about those Buckeyes, and I mean the word retarded.
Oh, I fully agree. Don't worry, I'm not an Ohio State alumnus. I leave that to my wife. So, so yeah. I mean, you'll have the Blockos, and when it gets up to Michigan week, I mean, honestly, Sunni and Shia, that's mild.
I was there for Muck Fishigan week, at least 3 that I can remember. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is like when it comes to like Ohio State and at least their football, it's like that's when all the differences get put aside. So it's like there is truth to what I'm saying. Is we can find common ground. I just don't know if we'll ever get back to like the way things were September 12th, but you know,
I don't want there to be something bad enough to unite everyone on that.
yeah,
But yeah, I agree. That was a tremendous portion of history.
yeah.
I never saw anything like it.
But this has been great, and I believe it's probably a very divisive topic, and I think we had a very civil conversation about it. And I will be in contact with you if you're okay with it, and maybe we'll have more discussions. And whether I find them or you find them, we'll try to find topics that are either divisive on society or maybe even between us, or a combination thereof.
Yeah, find
And just
something you love that pisses me off. Like, let's do it, man. I'm good. I'm down.
I'll have to bounce ideas off you.
All right, all right.
So,
Let's do
hey,
it.
Hugh, thanks again so much for your time. Thanks for having this conversation. And, if we crossed any lines, thank you for taking the time to do so. Appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely.
All right, man.